Hello and welcome to Snack TCG. I am the Lumber Snack and we're here for a junk deck spotlight. For those who don't know, junk magic is the format of Magic the Gathering that I invented, revolving around random number generation and never knowing what you're going to get each time you play, and using your strategy and playing your opponent's strategy in tandem. In my opinion, it's the most purest way to play this game, but who knows. Anyway, what I've done is I've constructed a bunch of junk decks, libraries, if you will, of just cards. Mostly commons, a lot of uncommons, some rares, no mythics whatsoever, so no planeswalkers in here. They're not allowed. They're not allowed in this game format. Put them in your commander deck, leave it at that. So, right now, what we're going to do is we're going to go over the uncommons in this junk deck. This junk deck is specifically humans and dwarves focused. So there are some unlisted dwarves and humans deck. And so everything's going to be dwarves and humans. There are 2 Phyrexians that you're not going to see in this video. But for a full list of the cards, they will be in the description below. At least the link to the Excel spreadsheet. And after we go over these 20-some cards that are the spotlight showcasers of this deck set, I'll go over the stats of the entire library, and then if you like what you can see, you can decide. So the way that I've priced the cards in my deck is based specifically on the format of play and how useful they are in the context of this deck. And so we're just going to get things started. We're going to kick off by looking at some cards. Let's get this shuffled. Next up, we have Reckless Crew. Now, what Reckless Crew does is it will create X2/1 Red Dwarf Berserkers tokens for each number of equipments or vehicles that you control at that given time. So say you have 3 pieces of equipment and 2 vehicles that are not even attached to anything. They're just on the field, and you cast Reckless Crew. What you can do is you summon that many Red Dwarf Berserker tokens, and then not only that, but you can equip them immediately with the equipment that you have at your disposal, which is awesome, unless the equipment, of course, yeah, that updated right. Unless the equipment, of course, makes your HP go lower, in which case, if it has a -1 toughness on. What do we have for the next card up? Goma Fata Vanguard. Whenever Goma Fata Vanguard attacks, target creature an opponent controls with power less than or equal to the number of warriors you control can't block this turn. So this is a very, very, very good card in the context of this deck, because this deck consists of 16 individual cards that have the warrior tag, making up 13.79% of this deck, just under 15%. So the odds and likelihood that you're going to have another warrior on the field with this, let alone 3, 4, is pretty high. It's pretty high. You can actually get some leeway on this, and if you got enough of these guys out and about, your opponent can't block. How awesome is that? All right, and then the next card that we have, Heartfire Immolator. Creature, human wizard. It gets prowess. So whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and then you can pay 1 red mana to sacrifice Heartfire Immolator. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature or planeswalker. See, situationally, this can be very nice. Say you are 8 turns in, you've got 8 lands out. So you've got 8 mana, and you've got just a bunch of 1-drop spells. You can cast a bunch of spells, and then you can sacrifice Heartfire Immolator, and it'll deal that much damage that you've gained to target creature or planeswalker. My issue with this card is that you can't deal that damage directly to your opponent, which makes this card weaker, in my opinion. I don't think it's a very great card. It can be situationally useful. Say your opponent has a very strong monster that you need to take out. You can get pretty good use out of it, but at the same point, if it could do damage to the opponent instead, that would be exponentially better. All right, and then the next card out, we have Frontier Warmonger. Frontier Warmonger. Whenever one or more creatures attack one of your opponents or a planeswalker they control, those creatures gain menace until end of turn. That's very useful. That's very useful because if you have this guy out on the field and your opponent has one defender, one super strong blocker, you attack with this guy and they cannot block you. You cannot be blocked with this guy because of that menace unless they have another defender out, meaning that you can almost certainly get free damage out if the situation is right. I think this is a very useful card, especially in the context of this deck. All right, next up we have Call in a Professional. Which players can't gain life this turn, damage can't be prevented this turn. Call in a Professional deals 3 damage to any target. That includes the opponent. I think this is a very useful card in this game, in this format, because there is a stall tactic health win. Because if you get over a certain health threshold, because I've played Magic games where someone will just ramp up health. Like in a Johnny deck or just like standard lifelink, they'll just ramp up health to the point where it's so difficult to bring them down, it just gets annoying. So why even have that when you can just make that a win condition? They're doing that to get you to concede anyway, so might as well just let it win. With this card, you you strip that ability for them to heal anymore for that turn. So if you have just one last victory, this is a very, very, very good card to have, in my opinion. All right. Next up, Mascot Interception. It costs 3 less if the creature that you're trying to control is a token, which is nice and useful because there are some token generators in this deck specifically, and they're very popular card type in the context of Magic the Gathering for a good reason, because you don't have to cast the tokens really. Usually they're self-generated, and for a 1-drop of being able to take control of a creature, imagine someone's got Shark Typhoon out. Imagine someone's got Shark Typhoon out and they have a 7/7 Shark. You can use this, cast it for a 1-drop because you're targeting a token creature, and you now have that 7/7 with haste and +2 attack, so 9/7. I think it's a good card, but it's situationally useful. It's not like, something where I'm like, this is the most extremely good, cool card in this entire format, but it's useful, and it can be useful. All right, and next up, we have Boundary Lands Ranger. Now, Boundary Lands Ranger. At the beginning of combat, your turn, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. I think this card is mid. Very, very mid. Not mid-range, just a mid card in general. I think that, you have to have a creature with power 4 or greater. You have to have that kind of power. And a lot of red, especially red humans and dwarves, don't have that kind of power. They're usually focused on low power, big army, and just aggressive play. I think that this card has use if the specific game that you're playing is something like Gruul. But, I don't know. Standalone, it's decent. A 2/2, it's not my favorite card. It's not the best card in this deck. All right. Next up, we have Akroan Line Breaker. Heroic. Whenever you cast a spell that targets Akroan Line Breaker gets +2/+0 and gains Intimidate until end of turn. That can be useful. That can be very useful in this format specifically. Sure, every single person that you're playing against is going to have a red creature at their disposal. It's very rare that they can't. That being said, you're the one who has the red strategy. You're the one who has the red focus in your deck. They might not have that same red focus, and they might be just drawing mostly their color. They might be taking mostly their color because that's what they have more lands of. I think this card's something that can get away, especially with that +2/+0. Having the Intimidate of being only able to be blocked by red creatures when you cast a spell that targets this guy, I think it can be very useful. I think it is a great card to have. I don't think it's like the best card. I don't think it's an automatic win by any stretch of the imagination, But it's a good card. It's a good card. Plus it has warrior synergy. Which is huge. Next up, we have Carol Keep Disciple. Whenever you activate a loyalty ability of a Chandra Planeswalker, Carol Keep Disciple deals 1 damage to each opponent. See, this would be useful if you were allowed to have Planeswalkers in this format, which you cannot because they're mythics. And so this then just becomes a 4-drop that's a 4/3, which is very decent. I have this card priced lower in this deck context because of that fact. So if you have a Chandra Commander deck or Chandra anything constructed and you buy this, there's 3 of these guys in here and you get those for your deck. So if that's of use and that's why you would buy it, again, I'm trying to get this format of gameplay popular because I think it's game changing. It's basically a deck building roguelike at this point. Imagine limited play except cheaper because that's what it is. All right, and then next up we have Hex Gold Halberd for Mirrodin. When you cast this is one of those Phyrexian things in the most recent Phyrexian set, I believe. This will create a 2/2 red rebel creature token when you bring it onto the battlefield. And as long as it's your turn, the equipped creature has first strike and trample, which is very solid because first strike and trample are extremely useful. You get that first damage and, as long as you're playing the game right, you don't take any damage back. Your guy's just fine because you're hopefully not attacking when there's people who can take you out. Because if you have first strike, you're wanting to go for someone against someone who has like maybe some 1/1s who aren't going to be able to do anything to you. I think that's a very good equipment card and definitely, without a doubt, the best equipment card in this entire deck. Next up, Rowan's Battle Guard, which has first strike, and as long as you control a Rowan Planeswalker, Rowan's Battle Guard gets +3/+0. This is one of those cards as well. Instead of being Chandra, it's now Rowan, because Chandra's like a sorceress or like a wizard type chick, and Rowan's a knight. And these Rowan's Battle Guards, they get super strong if you're playing with a Rowan Planeswalker. But because I said no Planeswalkers whatsoever, this card's usefulness is limited because of that. However, it's still a 3/3 with first strike, and for only a 4-drop, I think that's decent. I think that's a decent card. I think it's something where if you get in your deck, you're not really you get in your hand, you're not focused on the fact that you don't have a Rowan's Planeswalker. You're focused on the fact that now you have a 3/3 with first strike, so it can deal with a lot of the smaller enemies. Next up, we have Temur Battle Rage. Target creature gains double strike until end of turn. Ferocious. That creature also gains trample until end of turn if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. This is a solid card because double strike is a solid mechanic. And this is a card that especially increases its usefulness if you happen to find or have a creature with power 4 or greater. Say you've got +1/+1 tokens, or you have just your boost your creature by a +1/+0, and you just keep spamming that. This can get really damaging to your opponent because with that trample, you go straight through and you hit it with that double strike. This can decimate if you have the right situation. Next up, we have the Young Pyromancer, a creature human shaman. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 red elemental creature token. And this is only a 2-drop. Meaning if you happen to find this card in your first couple hands of play, you're in business. You just win that round pretty much, unless they have something to take it out, which there are some, deal X damage to target creature. They can take this guy out if you don't have anything to counter it, which red tends to not have counter spells. So maybe if you're playing in a blue deck as well, you can get the counters. But outside of that, if your opponent doesn't have anything to answer for this, you just build up your elemental army, and you just storm them. You just run them. You don't even worry about it. Just take them out with this guy. Next up, we have Explosive Welcome, an 8-drop for 8 damage and a 3 red mana refund. mid card, low mid card. For an 8-drop, that's ridiculous. This is obviously in some form of is-it deck is what you're wanting to play. But, you know, only if you have like a commander or like a constructed deck for that. Otherwise, there's very rarely a time when you're able to cast like an 8-drop spell in this format. I've had games and, you know, it has its usefulness, especially if you're that, but it's also only 5 damage to one target and 3 damage to any other. You can't even focus that 8 damage to one person. But you can target that 5 damage to the opponent straight to their face, so there is usefulness in that. All right. Next up, we have Ranger's Firebrand. This is from the Lord of the Rings set. Ranger's Firebrand deals 2 damage to any target, and the ring tempts you. So this is basically just shock, but the ring tempts you. So you can use that mechanic if you like it. It's a 1-drop, which is, you know, very, 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 very useful and very focused and popular in red decks. I don't care about the ring tempts you mechanic. I think it's gimmicky. But I also don't really care about the Monarch stuff either. You know, it's whatever. But it's a good card because it deals 2 damage to any target. You can deal that damage to your opponent. You can deal that damage to Krenko Mob Boss if they have it, because I think Krenko Mob Boss is a rare. You can deal that to whoever they have that you need to. Well, Krenko Mob Boss isn't going to pop up in this game because he's not in this deck. So he won't be something you're playing against. All right. Next up, we have Rockslide Sorcerer. Whenever you cast an instant, sorcery, or wizard spell, Rockslide Sorcerer deals 1 damage to any target. This is super useful in this format. Incredibly useful in this format because you're always pretty much starting with less than 20 health because of the scaling factor of this game. So those dealing 1 damage to any target, being able to just plink your opponent with any sort of sorcery spells. Not only that, there's a lot of sorcery spells and instants in this deck specifically to target your opponent. This is an extremely useful card. Plus, it's not only instants or sorceries, it's also wizard spells. Which when we go into when I show you the percent of this deck that is everything, you'll see that that's pretty decent. I think wizards are one of the more popular things in this. Next up, we have Riddle of Lightning. This is a 5-drop, and I tend to not like anything more than 4 drops, really. Unless it's a big, strong guy. I like green decks a lot. So, you know, I'm not too worried about that. But for a 5-drop, and it's one of the very few red spells that you can scry with, it's huge. And not only do you scry, you deal damage equal to the converted mana cost to that creature or player. Say that you get a different 5-drop. Say that you get a converted 7. Say you pull, when you scry, you have that explosive welcome. This could be an extra use for that explosive welcome. Instead of dealing 5 to 3 damage to 2 different targets, you can deal that entire 8 damage to your opponent. And then this is already a 5-drop. There's only like 3 more turns before you might have, you know, the lands responsible for an 8-drop. This is a solid card. This is one of the best cards in this deck, in my opinion. It's a very, very, very solid spell. Next up, we have Frill Scale Mentor. When Frill Scale Mentor enters the battlefield, put a menace counter on target non-human creature you control. There's a decent amount of non-human creatures in this deck, but there is not that many. Plus, you have to pay 3 mana and tap this guy to put a +1/+1 counter. But then again, it's on each. So say you did get that Reckless Crew card. Say you played that. Say you had 5 equipment cards, you have that, and now you get this card and you play it. And then the next turn you do that, that's a +1/+1 counter on every single one of those dwarf berserkers. This can be a very good card, but there's not a lot of creatures with menace. So, well, no, they don't have menace. Never mind. Well, you would have to put the menace counter on one of those dwarf berserkers. So it's less useful than I thought, but still it can be useful if you put more menace cards in here. What do we have next is the Joust card. Choose target creature you control, target creature you don't control. The creature you control gets +2/+1 until end of turn. If it's a knight, then those creatures fight each other. This is very common in green decks more, is the fight each other mechanic. It's a very useful one. I guess Rakdos also does a lot of fight each other stuff. Like, what is it? I had him in my commander deck before Carter. That guy, the Demon Berserker, that guy. It's basically the same thing. This guy's worse. If you get a knight, there's a few knights in here. Great. If you don't, it's still +2/+1. It's useful. I'm not going to say it's, unuseful. Next up, we have Joven. Summon a legend. Joven. Look at this guy. This is a 5-drop. And after you cast him, you can do 3 mana and tap Joven, the summoned legend, and destroy a target non-creature artifact. Joven's got to be one of the worst cards I've ever seen. I hate this guy. This guy's the worst. I guess destroying target non-creature artifacts useful for a 3-drop, but now this guy can't defend. Plus, I think that there's destroy target non-creature artifacts or even artifact creature stuff in this deck already. This guy's just here because I wanted to get rid of him. He's a punk. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. Joven, get out of my face. Next up, we have Prodigal Pyromancer, a much more useful card than Joven, the summoned legend. What makes the Prodigal Pyromancer so useful is that you can tap him and deal 1 damage to any target. This is one of the most useful mechanics in this format specifically because the before mentioned lower starting HP. Because if you get this guy 3rd turn, you cast him. Next turn, you tap him, you attack him. No mana spent, dealing 1 damage. That's 1/10 of your opponent's HP first round. It's about 0.09% the next round. Its effectiveness gets lower as you go. But still, that first round, focus on that first round of play, see where you're at. This card's a game changer for that first round. Because if you can get a leg up on your opponent early, that's more wins that they need to have and less wins that you need to have. Kargan Intimidator. It's a foil, so I've boosted the price by 10 cents on this card over my standard rare fee that I charge in my decks. He's a creature human warrior. Cowards can't block warriors. So there's a lot of warriors in this deck, or at least a decent amount of warriors in this deck. So you can use 1 whenever he's good. So this is a 2-drop. You can use 1. You can choose 1 that hasn't been chosen this turn. And there's either Kargan Intimidator gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Target creature becomes a coward until end of turn, so you can immediately make it so that nobody can block this guy if your opponent only has 1 creature out. And then target warrior gains trample until end of turn. I think that's useful because you can cast all of these on him in 1 turn and then start storming your opponent. It's very useful. It's one of the rares. It's one of the few rares in this deck, and I think it's a useful rare. Next up, we have Academic Dispute, which is a 1-drop. Target creature blocks this turn. If able, you may have it gain reach until end of turn, and you can learn. This is one of the very few instances of reach in this deck. Reach is extremely useful in this format, but it's not as useful in like Constructed or Commander because you and your opponent are sharing cards. You guys have the same strategy that you're playing. So if they have flying, then you likely have flying as well. If you don't have flying, then you don't really need reach. But it has the learn ability, which if you have those lessons from the Strixhaven in your shared sideboard, it can be very useful because you can get, what is it? It's like, I don't know if there's one colorless lesson where you can search your library for basic land, which is a huge in this format, but yeah. And then last but not least, for the uncommons and rares, we have Embereth Veteran. Sacrifice Embereth Veteran, create a young hero role token attached to another target creature. If you control another role on... who cares? What's important is that anything with toughness less than 3, you put a +1/+1 counter on it if it's a young hero. And it's only a 1-drop. It's a human knight, so it has knight synergy. It's a decent card. It's specifically decent because it's a 1-drop. Because you can get this out your first turn of combat. And now let's go over the stats. So, Joven's going to be... Joven makes up 0.86% of this deck, because there's 116 cards in total. The Phyrexians are 1.72, or I'll just let you look at these. We'll look at these. We're not going to go too much into detail on what each thing is. Anyway, thank you for watching. And if you like the idea of this deck and you want to see more, I'll leave the link to the Excel spreadsheet in the description below, as well as the rule set video for this format of Magic the Gathering in the description below. If you like the video, please subscribe. It would be huge. I will think you are cool if you subscribe. And if you subscribe, or if you don't subscribe, you just like the concept, you like Magic the Gathering, feel free to leave a comment. I would love to see that. I would love to see you leave a comment saying, I think that the Embereth Veteran is cool. 10 out of 10. I'll say, you know, there's cooler cards in here than the Embereth Veteran, but I like your enthusiasm. Anyway, thank you for watching.